So welcome. I'm Sarah Seidelmann, and I want to welcome you to the Hummingbird series, where I'm interviewing all sorts of amazing human beings that I think you could benefit from getting to know. So please meet Mason Currey. Uh, he author of Artists World on Creatives. And
Hi,
Mason,
thank you so
say
much for having
hello,
me on. It's
please.
a pleasure to be here.
This book really just inspired me so much. Essentially what it is a book filled with sort of little portraits of different famous artists throughout time: writers, playwrights, musicians, conductors, sculptors, painters. I'm probably missing some. I was wondering if you've ever profiled comedians. I was thinking that would be a whole new book.
Yeah, it could be.
So what I learned from this book is sort of a way of creating, and everybody has obstacles, and the way they got through them, there are dysfunctional ways to do that, which is fascinating to read in this book. I think addiction is a pretty strong thread through many of the creators, and those were some of the kind of most, well, I wouldn't, maybe not entertaining, but interesting portraits to read about, because yeah, maybe as sort of a warning. So they're just fascinating. So if you're a person who is a creative, a writer, an artist, a painter, or wanting to be more that way, this book and this book are fantastic. Tell me, Mason, what got you started doing this? And you're a writer, obviously, but do you create in other mediums?
No, I'm just a writer, and these books really came out of my own difficulty with writing over the years. I first out of college tried to write fiction for a while, and I had a really hard time. I barely got any writing done, and then I kind of switched to journalism, and I worked as a magazine editor, and still had a lot of trouble getting writing done. Although I was a little more successful because I had deadlines, and that always helps. But the whole time I was fascinated by how other people pulled it off. I think when you're really struggling with something, it's so helpful and just sort of comforting to read about how other people managed. And especially when other people, it turns out, had the same struggles or the same blocks or the same weird habits or funny strategies to get their thing done. So I've always been interested in those stories, and especially kind of the daily routine aspect of it, because that to me has always kind of seemed like the first puzzle to solve, is when are you going to fit it in on a daily basis when you have other commitments. So yeah, I originally started compiling some of these stories on a blog that I created while I was procrastinating on a writing assignment job at the time. And
that's when our best work gets made, when we're procrastinating.
Yeah, exactly. And then just sort of through a series of lucky breaks, I ended up getting the opportunity to turn it into a book project. And now with the sequel, I think there are 300 of these little kind of mini biographies of different creators' working days across the two books.
Yeah, and really fascinating. But this, which is centered around women, which I'm really glad you wrote, because I remember when I read this and I thought, wait a minute, these are all really amazing and fascinating, and I wish there were more women in it, and it just didn't happen. And he does a beautiful explanation of why that is in the intro to here, and your writing is spectacular. Your writing is fantastic. But here I got to know a lot of creatives that I haven't known about, and now I'm fascinated to go read their work as I read or look at their art or go to their show, or to learn more about what movies they made, because you get to know them as people and you kind of fall in love with them.
Oh, that's so nice to hear. Yeah, for me, it was a good education as well, because I wasn't very familiar with a lot of these women either going into the research, but there was just so much interesting stuff to uncover, and I hope it's a way for people to get into new writers or find new careers that they want to follow or research. So thanks. Yeah, that means a lot.
Yeah, and I mean, I know from I was I don't know if Beatrix Potter I don't know if she's in this one, because I haven't gotten through the whole thing, but she's an example of somebody women weren't allowed to publish books. So they were kind of like, now they're there, go back to your, tending the children or whatever you were doing. And I think that, yeah, things have expanded and opened up a lot more for women, which is exciting. Okay, so one of the great things that I noticed in reading this book was the daily rituals was that I noticed some people had these massively dysfunctional patterns, like evidenced by, let me see, I've dog-eared this thing a few pages, but this is from Patricia Highsmith, who wrote The Talented Mr. Ripley, which many of you may have seen through the movies. And she wrote, this is what her biographer wrote: her favorite technique is to ease herself into the right frame of mind for work. And it was to sit on her bed surrounded by cigarettes, ashtray, matches, a mug of coffee, a donut, and an accompanying saucer of sugar. She had to avoid any sense of discipline and make the act of writing as pleasurable as possible.
Yeah, I like that one too.
I love that. And then, of course, some of the portraits get into sort of the dangerous dabblings. Like some people sort of had to get 3 sheets to the wind off about, drink a fifth of Jack before they were ready to pour their soul out, which obviously is not something most of us want to do intentionally.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and there's a lot of coffee drinking sometimes in great excess. Yeah, I mean, in some of these profiles, I tried to hint at the destructive side of that. But they're quite brief, so it's like I'm trying to capture how people actually did it, and I hope it's clear that in a lot of cases you wouldn't necessarily want to do this.
Want to replicate it.
Yeah, exactly. That this isn't necessarily a healthy way to do it, but I thought it was worthwhile to kind of try to capture the huge variety, the huge spectrum, and there is, I think maybe we all have a little tendency towards some of that, and you can sort of recognize yourself in it, even if you don't go quite that far down the rabbit hole.
For sure. I mean, I was diagnosed with ADHD as an adult, and for a time did a trial of meds, which is really essentially what a lot of the people in here are either mainlining coffee, or they're starting cocaine, or they're taking methamphetamine, in the Victorian version or whatever it was now is Adderall or whatever. And it's kind of like this theme of we need something to get ourselves stimulated into that place where we can be creative, or at least that's the belief anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is the creative state, I think, is fairly delicate for a lot of people. It's a sort of fragile thing, and you can't just like switch it on and off. You sort of have to like walk yourself into it, and everybody kind of has their own rituals, or their own like kind of series of behaviors that kind of gets you into that right state of mind, is the way I think of it. So for some people, it might just be like brewing the coffee in a certain way. And for some people, it might be doing something really bizarre, something really superstitious, something really self-destructive. And I think a lot of times it's just kind of trial and error. I think because the process can be so delicate and fleeting, and it'll work one day and it won't work the next day, people, when something does work for them, they tend to really cling to it. So that's where I think you get some of these superstitious behaviors. You get people like Tchaikovsky, the composer, would take a daily walk of exactly 2 hours every day, no matter what. So even if it was pouring rain, it was always had to be exactly 2 hours long, because he felt like, superstitiously, he felt like if he didn't, and when he walked, that was when he got a lot of his good ideas. And he superstitiously felt like if he didn't get those exact 2 hours, it would screw up his whole thing. So yeah, I can relate to that feeling of it being very delicate, even if I don't necessarily have all those exact neuroses or OCD behavior.
I bet his Fitbit data was really off the charts. And I think another thing I noticed, because I read your first book before I had agreed to a crazy publishing deadline of 100,000 word book in 3 months. And I've got 4 kids and another job, so it was like, I thought it would be no problem, And then once I figured out what that meant, I was like, oh, that wasn't such a good idea. And then what's that?
Did you make that deadline?
I made it 7 days a week, 4 hours a day, every day, getting up at 5. Like there were a few days I didn't, but mostly, yeah. But one of the things that I really loved about some of the profiles, and I know it'll show up here too, is that the people that were sort of steady creators and seemed to have this beautiful life that accompanied that, not a life of obsession and not a life of destruction, seemed to have this really cool balance, which was about 4 hours of creativity and then some fun and some physical activity. Like they did weird calisthenics at lunch, or they like went on a walk with friends, or they always went to the movies every afternoon. I mean, it was like this, it was really clear to me from reading hundreds of profiles, like, wow, the key is get yourself doing your creative thing, but then make sure you move your body, because that's the balance. It keeps you kind of in, yeah. How about, did that kind of come through for you as well?
Yeah, yeah. And so many people talk about how even if they felt like they could keep working, it was better if they stopped and kind of left some gas in the tank, because often the next day, if they had let themselves go too long, they would end up spending a lot of time fixing what they had done at the end of the previous day. That like if you go on too long, you end up just sort of goofing it up, and that you want to kind of stop when you feel like you still have a little bit left to say, a little bit left to create, and then the next morning you can pick it up. And it's sort of that like thread that you pick up from day to day that ends up being more important than the one workday, I think, is another theme that comes through, that it's like the repetition itself has the sort of power. I think that's another thing about the daily routine aspect that is interesting, is that it's the kind of thread of days that over time really adds up, even if people are really only working 2 or 3 or 4 hours a day, maybe.
Yeah. So have you, I mean, has it changed from, as you've done all this research, has it formed and carved the way you spend your time creatively?
Yeah, it has. I've always been an early morning person, in the sense that I feel like I get my best work done really early in the morning, but not in the sense that I like to get up early in the morning. So like earlier in my life or in my career, I would get up early if I had a deadline or had something I was really busy. I had to get something done. And then when I got the first book project, I was working a full-time job, and I realized I had to get up early every day if I was going to do this book and work. And so it was like it was difficult to make myself get up early every morning, but also I sort of grew to really like it, because if there is this window of time where I'm at my most focused and I get my best work done, it's satisfying to take advantage of that every day instead of just occasionally. So since then, I've really started just getting up. Like I get up at 5:30 every morning, whether I have a deadline or not, whether it's a crunch time or not. And yeah, I find that has been good for me, although it means I have to go to bed at like 9:30 and stuff like that. It's like in some ways it's a tricky lifestyle, but I find that it works for me.
I think one thread as I was reading some of the profiles in the new book, which is centered on women, is like work is so satisfying that it's like you may have to give up something, but that process of being with the muse, or whatever you call it, being creative, is so deeply rewarding that it becomes worth it to like make these sacrifices. And I also was some of these were so suspect, like the person who woke up at 5 to always serve breakfast to her. I forget who that was. Let's see if I can remember. She was a mom and in Paris, and I think this was like in the 1900s or something. And oh gosh, I'm not going to remember the right person. Maybe it was Grace. No, it was Grace Haley. Well, anyway, she would wake up with her daughter, make sure she got her breakfast. Then the daughter went with the nanny. And then at night she'd come home after working all day. I think she was a sculptor, to feed her daughter. And then she would hit the nightlife in Paris. And then she would be like partying down, dancing, fornicating. Because as an artist, I think she said something like, as an artist, it's my duty to experiment, or something fantastic.
Yeah, it was a painter. Her name was Tamara de Lempicka.
Yes, Tamara, yes.
Yeah, she was like a Polish-born aristocrat who arrived in Paris broke because of the Bolshevik Revolution, and decided she was going to be an artist. And yeah, I think the quote was something like, "It is an artist's duty to try everything."
Yes.
Sort of said she was going to put her daughter to bed every night, and she was going to have breakfast with her every morning. But then, as you say, in between, she would be out all night, and she would go out and take drugs and go do these kind of seedy bars, and then she would come back and paint for 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 hours. So
Right.
yeah, that was a fun one to read about.
I'm guessing we just didn't get the reportage on the 4-hour nap she took from like noon to 4. You know, she must have had to sleep at some point.
Yeah, and you know, so many of these people, you sort of wonder, how did they really pull that off? And I tried as much as possible to figure out as much as I could, but sometimes, you know, sometimes you're
there are
just
holes.
Like, yeah, there are holes.
We can only imagine. Yeah. I think one of the themes I kind of got out of these books is the key is letting that creative torch burn in you without completely burning out, like without frying it. And yeah.
Yeah, I often think it's like this push and pull between like forcing it, but not forcing it too much. You know, like you kind of have to like force yourself to get to work every day, even if you don't feel like it, because I think so many of these artists talk about how inspiration is not something you can like wait around for, that it's something that only shows up if you show up, that it's like out of the everyday work that you hit these patches of inspiration. So I think there's that side of it, but at the same time, there is a point, at least I've experienced that point, where you're just like pushing yourself and pushing yourself and pushing yourself, and you sort of start getting diminishing returns. And so I feel like there's definitely this balance you're trying to strike where you have to make yourself do it, but at the same time, if it just becomes this like joyless slog, you might have to also step back and be like, wait, maybe I don't need to push that hard, or maybe I need to take a break, or, you know.
Or set it aside for a while. I know sometimes I'm like, I've got to get to this thing and figure it out. And then it's like, it just won't let me. And like, it just needs to be put aside. So yeah, I can relate to that a lot.
Yeah.
I think a couple of themes, community seems to be a really powerful theme. Like a lot of the people that I really enjoyed reading their profiles seem to have this collection of creative friends that they would mingle with, or they would read their work to them, or a partner seems to be, again, this theme of a loving partner who is willing to read, edit, whatever your work, or comment on it. Or just simply support you physically and feed you so that you can keep going. Yeah,
that is a big theme. I know it's and again, it's like, but at the same time, so many people talk about needing to create that solitary space where they're not going to be interrupted and they can be alone with their thoughts and kind of like almost wallow in it or sort of burrow into the project. So it's like there's so many things that you kind of have to balance. It's that balance between solidarity and you know, community, and it's that balance between pushing yourself but not pushing yourself too hard. And I think there's also, like you said, there's like getting deep into it, and then there's stepping back and getting some critical distance. And I think a lot of the people use their community as a way to get that critical distance, you know, getting someone to read it back to you or read it to them, or just being part of a group where you share work and you sort of give each other a reality check is a theme that comes up a lot.
Yeah. And part of that's like the most fun. I mean, like I was just working on a project. We were pitching one of my books as a television show, which I was like, I don't even know. I mean, this idea was, it was a friend who was like, let's pitch this. And I was like, okay. And it wasn't so much like, who knows if it probably will never get made, but it was the pleasure of talking with a friend. Well, if we did pitch it, what would that be like? And then I phoned another friend, and then we got together, and she's like, oh, I could see this, you know, and then I talked to another friend, and we were all like laughing, and it was so fun to just get into that imaginative space and enjoy that together. So I just think if you're an artist, a creator, you're wanting to support yourself on that journey, I highly recommend getting one or both. It'd be a great gift for a grad student or a person who's going to graduate from high school this year who you know is an artist. Maybe their parents are pushing them to become a mathematician or a judge or a lawyer or something like that. Just sneak this in, like in the other presents, you know, just like amongst the savings bonds. Because I think it just, would you come away, and it's one of those books you could like leave it on the coffee table and just grab it, read one at a time. It's so easy to just kind of, and it really just, it's given me that permission to accept my own process is just very unique. And I think a lot of us think, oh my gosh, if I were a real writer, then I would maybe be like Liz Gilbert and write every single day. Well, you know, some of us have a job and kids and, you know, whatever, we're champion bowlers and we've got other gigs going on, you know, we can't do that. So however you do it, maybe you check into a hotel and you binge write or you binge sculpt or you binge bead. I don't know what it is, but you know, like allowing whatever, whatever way
Yeah.
you want.
Yeah, I think between the two books, it's like whatever you do, you'll probably find somebody who does something similar. I like the idea of there being this almost like library of case studies, and people can go through and see what resonates with them, or maybe pick up some tips or some tricks, or like you say, just kind of feel better that they're, but even if it feels like they're not on the right track, you know, maybe you are. At least for me, compiling the books, it was like the perfect match for that time, you know, trying to have a day job and work on a book project. It was like the perfect book project to be working on, because here I was trying to figure out how to do this, and I was researching how other people figured it out. So, you know, it's nice to think that that might work for readers too.
Yeah. Well, do you have any like tips for people out there who are working a day job and are like, wow, I dream of a day where I could spend my day painting or writing or whatever it is, you know, that they're longing to do? What would you like, what would you want them to know?
I mean, I would say it's good to pay attention if there is a time of day or night that you feel is your best time, that you feel most focused, or you're able to get into the creative flow most easily, and then do whatever you can to carve out a little time at that time of day. Ideally, every day. It doesn't have to be, but I think, you know, the repetition, the small increments of daily work, that's really the trick. It really adds up over time, and I think then it's easier to sustain it over a long period of time, which often is what it takes. You know, it might take years or decades for people to be able to do something full time, unfortunately. But also, if you're enjoying those days as they add up, you know, I think that can be satisfying, and, you know, regardless of how much recognition you get or how much it can translate into a full time thing. So that's,
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. Because the joy of making is so evident through these pages. It's like, I could no longer, I don't care, like, oh, so many of them are just like, I could care if it sells, but it's like, it's sustaining me and I can't stop because it's so wonderful to be in the process of creating.
And even the people who are kind of miserable when they're creating, they also sort of say, but at the same time, they want to give it up. You know what I mean? Like, it's, even
Yeah.
if it's not joyful, there's something so engaging, or you know, it's like a satisfying challenge. So I would say, even if you don't always find it fun or joyful, if you find it engaging in that way, it can work over the long haul.
Yeah. Well, awesome. Well, people go out, get one or both of these books. They're so amazing. Give them to any graduating person or any person who you know who's an artist who's struggling to believe in themselves or to make time for themselves, because I think they'll find it really, one or both will be really inspiring. So thanks, Mason, so much for coming on.
Thank you
Really
so much.
appreciate it. It's a delight to meet you.
Yeah, you too. I really appreciate it.